As we promised to do, we're going to bring you updates on what's happening with the Ukrainian incursion into the Kursk region of Russia. And the war continues to fight. Russia continues to try and defend itself and to try to cut off the incursion. Ukraine has shown no hesitation in their continuing to push this operation further into Russia. And we're going to get a look at today at exactly what's going on tactically, what the current situation is, and most importantly, we're going to see where is this going. And some of the problems that we're going to see that have really kind of plagued the American support of this from the beginning are still at play, showing that we don't seem to learn any lessons so far. And we're going to see what happens with this next. But first of all, just to bring everybody up to date tactically, Gary, if you can throw that map up there, just kind of orient people where we're talking about here. The areas in the red here to the right, of course, that's where the 600-kilometer or 600-mile rather line of contact has been fighting for quite a long time, where most of the clashes have been. You see in the Kharkiv area there, in the kind of the upper center part, you see the small little red dots. That's where the Russians actually made an incursion about 10 kilometers a couple months back. And then in that red circle there north of Sumy, you see that's where the current border clash is going on. That's where the Ukraine side has attacked into Russia there. Then this map here, the tactical map from the Institute for the Study of War. And again, just a word. I know a lot of people have a lot of problems with the Institute for the Study of War because of some of the people, Jack Keane being foremost among them, is very often puts out disinformation and skews things badly, but they are relatively accurate. Actually, they're very accurate on actual dispositions and what things are on the map. It's their interpretations that are significantly off, and we're going to talk about that actually in a minute as well. But you see this area in blue, this thatched area in blue is the current kind of odd configuration of what the Ukraine side has done so far. All that is in the Russian territory in the Kursk region. They call it an oblast. It's sort of like analogous to a state. And so you see that they're just from looking at this from a military perspective, it's hard to figure out what they're actually trying to accomplish because most of those little finger-looking projections you see out there are on roads. And many of the armored vehicles that they have had, they're basically driving up the road as far as they can just to kind of to go into Russia. It's unclear. And we're actually going to look at specifically what was their intention. What is the objective? What is the Ukraine side trying to accomplish? And it's not going to turn out very well, I don't think, for the Ukraine side. But right now, it's also not well for the Russian side, and that's I think one of the objectives that Zelensky is trying to accomplish, and we'll see him talking about that momentarily. But first of all, it's important to know that this is not the first time that this has happened. Back in March of this year, there was this group, relatively or variously called Russian freedom fighters, although they were certainly attached with other Ukrainian fighters and definitely supported by the West. And with all their equipment vehicles, they made an incursion near the city of Belgorod, a little to the right of on that bigger map, which you saw, where they went in with a number of troops in there. They made an incursion into the Russian territory. And Gary, if you can put that next that map up there, this was a map also from the ISW of that time, and all those areas of the red you see around the border in the white area, that's the Russian. The Russian incursion into Russian territory by the Ukrainian troops at that time. It was in the Belgorod Oblast. And so they made a number of incursions in there. But after reportedly suffering up to 1,500 casualties, they were eventually all driven out. So a lot of the Russian people right now, and even some of the pro-Russian mill bloggers and their media have been pretty harsh in talking about the Russian side and how did they let this happen again? Why are there not more troops on the border? I mean, they're at war with Ukraine. It appears that the Russian command viewed this as an unlikely event. I think they said, okay, they tried it in Belgorod in March. We crushed that. They lost a lot of people. Then they went back and they never tried again. But then they didn't further strengthen the border. Presumably, because they didn't want to spend the manpower on there, because they have somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 troops out of contact, off of those main lines of defense we're talking about, where the line of contact is, for potentially a bigger summer offensive here, which could come at any number of other places. But that's not what happened. In fact, the second thing that the Russian people are upset about is that how could Ukraine have assembled a force of this size with all of the combat vehicles they had, the personnel, artillery, drone fights, etc., without the knowledge of the Russian side? Now, many of the military bloggers I've seen said that some of them were actually calling this ahead of time, and that they had identified some of the buildup, but it didn't look like the Russian forces took protective action. They didn't put any troops down on the border. And so a lot of people are really upset about that, and they're trying to, find out exactly what's going on with that. But now let's look at the current situation here. Gary, if you could put that blue thatched map back up again. This is how far the Ukraine, no, I'm sorry, not that one, the other one. That's the one. This is how far they push it. And it's a fairly sizable area, by the way. It's hard to tell from that bigger map that I showed, but this is somewhere north of 300 square kilometers that the Ukraine side has pushed in there. And let me specify, it's not that they have, quote, captured the territory. That's how far they have moved troops in there, because it's one thing to drive a long way into a territory, and another thing to actually occupy and control the territory. And it's unclear yet if the Ukraine side has enough forces to do that. Now, there have been reports that the Ukraine side has been moving engineering assets up into these penetrations. And what that implies is that their objective is to dig in and create defensive positions to hold the territory for longer. But the bigger question is, where are you going to go with this? And what is your ultimate objective? And how does this play into winning the war? Because if tactics are one thing, even battles are one thing, but if they don't contribute toward winning a war, even if they're successful, they could end up being costly for the side doing it, if the cost to doing so deprives the attacking force, in this case the Ukrainians, of manpower that they might need to actually wage war. And I think that's where we're heading, as I'm going to show here in just a second. But first of all, let's see what the United States is saying about this, because Pentagon spokeswoman Singh was asked about this. I think it was yesterday. What is going on with this, and what does the United States think? Here's what she said.
Ukraine is going to do everything it can to continue to take back its sovereign territory, and that's what we're seeing they're doing in this what you're referring to in this Kursk oblast. We're going to continue to support Ukraine with the capabilities and the systems that they need. We don't feel like this is escalatory in any way. Ukraine is doing what it needs to do to be successful on the battlefield.
And, it's just unfortunately kind of obvious to anyone who understands about military affairs that she does not understand what she's talking about. What does that even mean? They're going to continue to do what they need to do to win on the battlefield. This is an incursion into Russia. It has embarrassed Putin without question. It's made a lot of the Russian people angry. There's no doubt. So in that regard, that's happy, makes people on the Ukraine side happy. But what is the objective? And, that's what she should be saying, talking about, well, here's where this is going. Here's what this is going to accomplish. Making Putin mad, embarrassing Putin, while that may make you feel good for the moment, what does that do militarily? What does that do to actually move forward your war aims? If your war aim is to win the battle and then win the war, how does this contribute to that? And that's not even addressed. Interesting thing, that's not the only place it's not addressed. Now, I mentioned the Institute for the Study of War a minute ago, and they have been unabashedly pro-Ukraine. They have interpreted anything the Russians have done from the outset as being incapable. Usually they're incompetent. They don't have any capability. They're limited. They make all these disastrous moves, whatever. Just interpreting everything in the worst possible way for the Russian side. Interesting that this time they're not even giving an estimate of what the objective is. And they use a pretty lame excuse, in my view. They say the Institute for the Study of War will not offer assessments about the intent of the Ukrainian operation in order to avoid compromising Ukrainian operational security. Okay, come on, man. That's nonsense because number one, you claim that you're not connected to the Ukrainian government. You don't have access to whatever they're doing. You're just making an assessment of what you see on the battlefield. Allegedly, not unlike what we do here. We see all these evidence, we see the inputs from the various sources, and then we make an assessment based on what we see and our knowledge of military experience. I don't have to, I'm not going to be putting them at risk, or I'm not going to be putting the Russian side at risk or the Ukraine side at risk if I give you an assessment based on my military experience of what we're seeing on the ground there. So for the ISW to say that they're not even going to talk on that, I think probably is more likely means that they don't know, because this doesn't make any sense. Because the idea that you can send a few thousand even, and so far I've heard listed a little north of 1,000 troops up into Russian territory, and think that the Russia's not going to be able to eventually move enough forces back in there to completely drive everybody out is almost impossible. How could they not? How could you take 1,000 against a country that allegedly has somewhere around 600,000 to 700,000 troops on the Ukrainian side, that they couldn't shift enough over there in relatively short order to drive out a single, basically a couple of battalions, roughly? I mean, it wouldn't take that much to do. Now, if Ukraine is going to be adding more troops to that, because I've seen other reports this morning that says that they do have additional troops to put in there, okay, fair enough. But then that means that Russia will bring even more to bear to knock that out. There's no way that Russia is going to just sit by and allow that, incursion into their country to stand while they go elsewhere and do other things. That they're going to get that out of their system, because that's bad for them. Public relations wise, it's bad for their morale, and it will not satisfy the anger of many in Russia. But let's go then now to what Zelensky. Okay, so the United States says we're not even talking about the objective. They're doing whatever they're doing. You have the ISW that says they're just outright not going to comment about it. Here's what Zelensky himself said yesterday.
Ukrainians know how to achieve their goals, and achieving the goals at war was not our choice. Russia brought the war to our land, and it should feel what it has done. We strive to achieve our goals as soon as possible in peacetime under just peace conditions, and it will happen.
Okay, I'm not even sure what he's saying there. And when Gary and I previewed this before going on this morning, I actually had to run it back a couple of times, because it almost seems non sequitur, like he's saying one thing and then the very next sentence says something different. So I'm going to run it back again here. Gary, if you can play that again, because I want you to listen carefully to what he says at the front, which is, at first, Russia invaded our country and caused us a lot of pain. So we've now done this to make them feel the pain that we've been feeling. And then somehow immediately transitions to, we're looking for something in peacetime. See if maybe you can figure this out better than I. Run that one more time, Gary.
Ukrainians know how to achieve their goals, and achieving the goals at war was not our choice. Russia brought the war to our land, and it should feel what it has done. We strive to achieve our goals as soon as possible in peacetime under just peace conditions, and it will happen.
So we will accomplish our objectives in peacetime, and it will happen, even though we just launched an invasion into Russia. Which, listen, you got to look at the likelihoods of this turning out to anything good for the Ukraine side. According to many estimates I've seen, one of the reasons why Ukraine was able to amass the manpower that they did, in order to get it, they had to pull reserves off of the border between Ukraine and Belarus. So, Gary, if you can put the big map back up there again, I want to show you what we're talking about here, because the Ukraine side has had troops along their border. You can see in the north, in the top of this map, you see Russia on the right, Belarus on the left, and you see that gray line delineating the border between the two. And on that border with Belarus to the left, north of Kiev, etc., by some reports, Ukraine pulled some troops from there to assemble in under the cover of a lot of the forested areas on their side of the border here, and from a place called Pokrovsk in the south. Now, that's the more important of the two. Number one, it means that Zelensky has weakened his border security in the north in the Belarus in the event that Russia should make an incursion there. But he's also weakened it where Russia is pushing the most in the east. And you'll see there in that red area, that not too far from the Zaporizhia in the lower right, and basically the lower center of that map on the Ukraine side there. And I want to remind you of something that Our friend Alex from History Legends talked about on his channel a day or so ago, where he's talking about the importance of Kursk. And just tell me when you're watching this, why, if you want to win a war, are you going to take troops away from the most vulnerable place you've got, where the enemy is pushing the hardest, in a place called Pokrovsk, and move them up here? We're going to talk about that in a second. Here, though, is what Pokrovsk is all about.
We're gonna focus on this part of the front, on the western side of Avdiivka. What happened in the last few days is an unmitigated disaster for the Ukrainian army. That was the frontline situation on the 1st of June. Then fast forward a month to the 1st of July, and that's the situation now in early August. The Russians literally advanced 12 kilometers in that direction, 9 kilometers in this one, and 6 kilometers there. The main reason behind this military debacle can be attributed to negligence. Complete negligence. We all remember how Ukraine bragged about building a powerful line of fortifications. Yet, in reality, in so many sectors of the front, Ukrainian commanders did not bother to build any fortifications. And when they did, these fieldworks ended up being fully exposed and poorly planned out. In the end, the Ukrainian army could not rely on a defense in depth. The moment the first line of defense crumbles, it's GG well played.
And it is so important. You heard him use that phrase at the end, defense in depth. That is so vital, because in order to be able to fight a continual war, especially in a war of attrition like we're in right now, you've got to have multiple lines of defense already set up, so that as you get pushed back in one area, once you get close to losing a particular line of defense, you have another one already manned and built, so that those troops could then, once the position is untenable, fall back onto that, so that when the other side comes up, they already have another harder position. So they just went through this difficult line here, and then as soon as they get back over here, they've got to start all over again with another new line of defense, to make it much more difficult. It appears that the Ukraine side has not been doing that. And instead, this line of Pokrovsk is reportedly, and this is by people who are looking at satellite imagery, not taking anybody's word for granted, just what they can see on the ground. This apparently is the last line of defense that's built, that's already prepared. If Russia penetrates this line, and that appears to be why they're pushing so hard in the Pokrovsk area, then the Ukraine side won't have a prepared place to fall back to. So if that's your most vulnerable position right now, you should be doing everything you can to reinforce that at the line of contact, while simultaneously building some new fortifications on the other side of that. That's what makes this position here, going into the Kursk area, not smart militarily. While it may do some things on the public relations line, while it may make you feel better at the moment, because as Zelensky said there, apparently one of his objectives is to make Russia feel pain. That has been successful. Russia is feeling pain right now. Putin is embarrassed. As a matter of fact, here's one of his frankly odd statements. Well, hang on just a second. I'll show that in just a second, Gary. Here's what Putin has said shortly after this happened, in explaining it to his people.
The Kiev regime has carried out another large-scale provocation. It is indiscriminately firing various types of weapons, including missiles at civilian buildings, residential buildings, and ambulances.
Now, that's just so you understand. Obviously, that's for the domestic audience in Russia, but it does underscore, because he had to come before and say something to his people, because there's so many people are angry that the actual Russian territory was breached, and in not a small amount of territory, as we pointed out a second ago. So he has to answer his angry people. So in that regard, Zelensky has been successful. And as the Washington Post pointed out, I think it was this morning, Gary, if you can throw that one back up there again, Zelensky said that Russia will answer for this terror. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned on his Telegram channel, apparently this was earlier today, as a rescue operation continued to retrieve victims from under the rubble. We will do everything to ensure that the world continues to be with Ukraine, supporting our defense and saving the lives of our people. So that might be another clue as to what Zelensky's thinking, that he wants to have something big and splashy on the world stage, and then the media to draw the attention to it, to say, hey, give us more stuff. We need more ammunition. We need more troops, etc. But the problem is, it's a media blitz, And as that headline is there just showing that Gary had up there a second ago, Russia is going to take action. They are already moving troops into the area. And it's likely as soon as they get enough combat power there, and you see some of these these are allegedly video of in Russia where troops and weapons are moving in that direction. I mean, it stands to reason that that's what's going to happen. So here's the big problem for Zelensky is that in order to get this media success, and in some regards, he succeeded at that at the tactical level for the moment. But folks, just imagine how many people he's going to sacrifice to get that media blitz at the tactical cost of what's happening along the line of contact. Because while Russia's moving troops from elsewhere within the Russian mainland, it doesn't appear that they're moving troops off of the line of contact where they're having all the pressure on the Ukraine side. And even if they did, it would probably come from the Kupiansk area or somewhere up north, possibly even in the Kharkiv area, then that small little incursion we've talked about several times before. But they can do that. Even if it takes longer, they can do that. And that's not going to have any big operational impact at all, not even on the tactical level. But for Ukraine to withdraw troops, especially from the Pokrovsk area, it can have huge negative ramifications because that Russia is going to continue to press on there because they have a very clear operational objectives and a near-term objectives, which is to take and breach that line at the Kursk area. And presumably they have reinforcement troops to follow on to exploit that they would move in immediately behind it. Where now then, as opposed to what I told you is the ideal place where you have prepared multiple lines of defense following that, now all of a sudden Russia can push harder and it'll be more difficult for the defender instead of the attacker to continue to move forward. And then, folks, you have the real potential for having big movements on the Russian side. We haven't seen that really at any point in the war, other than the one time when the Ukraine side caught the Russians completely with their pants down and unprepared in the Kharkiv area in 2022. And Russia appears to have learned some very painful lessons from that, and they don't appear to have repeated them. But since that time, on neither side have you seen any big movements. But what you have had is what appears to be the Russia way of war is to weaken the Ukrainian defensive capabilities, their armed forces, to continue to whittle down their ability to defend their country in these slow, methodical moves that limit the risk to the Russian forces, though they are suffering a lot of casualties, but it's not massive casualties. All this stuff about meat grinder attacks and Russia throwing these assault waves, that's mainly for Western media purposes. There's very little physical evidence that those things have happened. To the contrary, there's evidence that they don't do that they limit it, that they highlight firepower over the manpower, because they appear to be content and patient to continue to whittle away at there. But here's the thing. That comes with the expectation and the intent that at some point the manpower gets so weakened on the opposition side, on the Ukraine side, that then when there is a break, that Russia has operational reserves to flow into the area. And then you may see big movements. And once that happens, then Ukraine doesn't have the manpower. Just imagine, by all the reports anyway, Ukraine had to pull troops from other parts of the line just to have enough troops to maintain this operation here. And of course, that also implies that they don't have the ability to sustain it. So they may well be digging into some of these places to hold on to it, but that is only going to delay and not stop anything. They don't have the materiel, they don't have the manpower to actually make this a meaningful penetration to go up into the Russian mainland. They just don't have it. And as I pointed out before, not only did they do this in March in the Belgorod area, they've also had a similar operation last year on the Dnieper River and the Dnipro River, where they had this got on the Russian side of the river in a place called Krinky, and they had enormous sacrifices and enormous losses, and then eventually gave it back up. So it's another example of what I believe, and I know it's not popular among many to say here in the West, is the incompetence on the senior levels of the Ukraine side. Because these things make no sense on an operational, much less tactical, and definitely not on the strategic level. If you're trying to win a war, you can't spend a lot of manpower and men's lives fighting for something that won't even give you a big advantage if you get it, like the operation in Krinky, like the operation in Belgorod. They didn't gain anything from any of those things. They just lost a lot more troops. And in the end, the overwhelming size of the Russian forces reestablished both of those. And that's almost certainly going to happen here. I don't see any way that it won't. So the question is, how much more is Ukraine going to pay for this? And if the Russian side sees a target of opportunity, and if they can identify where Ukraine may have pulled troops off even the Belarus border, they may use that as a launching point again. There was already some reports that Russia was getting ready for another incursion into the Sumy area, somewhere north of the border there, all ready to go back in to make a new penetration. Perhaps they may do that again to put even more pressure on the Ukraine side and then put Zelensky in a real tough bind. Now, what are you going to do? You're going to keep on going with this incursion into Kursk while you're facing a new attack from the Russian side in the Sumy area? I don't know. It's unclear. I don't have any idea, actually, the level of risk that the Russian side is willing to take, and whether they're going to take that risk or whether they're going to stay with the slow and methodical, like they did with Krinky, like they did with Belgorod, and like they appear to be doing here, or are they going to make a bigger, bolder move somewhere? We don't know. So the proclivity seems to be against the big, bold moves, but we'll see. Maybe they're also tired of this because, like I said, the media win on the Ukraine side has a double edge because it could also cause enough angst publicly for Putin on the other side that he pushes harder to reestablish that as opposed to staying patient. So we don't know how that's going to play out. But the bottom line is that right now, you do have a fairly large incursion into Russian territory in the Kursk region, but based on history, based on a military assessment of how things work and how things don't, this is not going to end well for the Ukraine side. That's your deep dive for today. Really appreciate you guys coming on here. We're going to stay on top of this now. And let me remind you also that I'm going to be out of town for the next 10 days. I'm going to take the family on a long delayed trip to Europe, just kind of an end of the summer thing before my son goes back to school. But I'm going to come on as much as I can while I'm gone, but it'll be limited. And Gary's going to take the reins sometimes. Larry Johnson's going to come in and do some filling to make sure that when things happen, even if I'm not available, you can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive channel to continue to bring you the updates. And also we have this afternoon at 2:00. We have another one of our Deep Dive Army huddles that's only for members who have joined our channel. So we invite you to join again because this is one of our more popular deals where I get to engage directly with you. We just, chew the fat a little bit. We actually engage back and forth with our subscribers there when they're talking in the chat situation. I get to know you better. You get to know us better. But it's only for those who have joined our channel. So we really appreciate those who have and enjoy you because it's really a lot of fun. And Gary gets to play a lot of that because a lot of people always hear me talk about, Gary, would you throw this up or whatever? But, kind of behind the curtains, this is your chance to actually see what Gary brings to the table. It's always a lot of fun. Join us today at 2:00, and we'll see you then. Thanks.